passage that was read to us just a moment ago, part of the story of Gideon and his little army. It's a very interesting story because it says so much about mankind. It says so much about you and me and the troubles that we face and the solution to those troubles. And so today I want us to look at some things that really confront us in reference to this. So much of the time the goodness of God is forgotten very, very quickly. And as a matter of fact, that was the very problem that the Jewish people had, the Hebrew people, all through their history. Yeah, it's strange, but of all of the nations in the history of the world in which God has intervened, that God has guided, the Israelite nation stands right at the very top of the list. But of all of the nations in the world who have constantly gone away from God in the history that the Bible gives us, it was the Israelite nation. It's so easy for us to forget about God's goodness to us sometime. And so after that goodness has, I hate to use this term, but after that goodness has kind of worn off, we've kind of gotten used to it, and things are better now for us than they were, we go back to our old ways. We go back to our old faults. We go back to our old sins. The story of Gideon is a great story to tell us something about ourselves and about how God works. It illustrates so much about humanity. And after all, we're all part of humanity. One of the things that I think we all have fault along this line. God is a God of our emergencies. God is a God of our emergencies. God, I get along pretty well as long as things are going along okay. And then when something goes bad, I think maybe I'd better take time out to pray a little bit about this. Or maybe I ought to talk to God about it. Or maybe I ought to get religion for a little while. Not many of you were alive during the Second World War. Matter of fact, I might be the only one here who was alive during that time. But I remember this very, very well, that when the war came along and we felt threatened and people from every family went into the services and the automobile factories closed down and they opened up with making armaments and trucks for the Army and the Marine Corps and things like this. The first thing you know, people started going to church. And then for a good little while there was a great surge of church going. And people were interested in church and people were interested in God. And then after the war was over, that continued for a while, but then, we became prosperous and everything was all right. And even though the Korean War and the Vietnam War came along, it was not like that big world war. And the first thing you know, we just kind of drifted away. God is a God of emergency for us. When we're in bad times, we need God. When things go bad at home, we need God. When things go bad at work, we need God. And so that's kind of the way of it. Let me read to you from the 6th chapter here, just a little bit about something it says about Gideon and the way this whole thing started. I'm going to do a lot of reading during this sermon. I want you to give heed to exactly what is being said. And the children of Israel did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. The Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And it came to pass when the children of Israel cried to the Lord because of Midian, that the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel, and he said to them, "Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought you out of Egypt." By the way, let me pause here. Notice he didn't say, "I brought your forefathers out of Egypt." This was hundreds of years out of the Egyptian bondage, after the Egyptian bondage. But he says, "I brought you out of Egypt." There is a connection that the Jewish people have until this day about the way not just our forefathers were brought out of Egypt, God brought us out of Egypt. And there is that dynamic connection that they have with their past. And so God says, I brought you up out of Egypt and brought you forth out of the house of bondage. Remember that. I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of those who oppressed you. I drove those people out from before you and gave you the land. Wow. God has really intervened with these people. He has done so much for them. He delivered them from their slavery. He led them out. He doesn't mention it here, but he gave them the law. He was with them during their wandering through the wilderness. When they came to the land of Canaan, he says, I brought you into this land and I gave you this land. Stop and think about the goodness of God for a moment. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You should not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. It's too bad for the next phrase. The next phrase says, but you have not hearkened to my voice. God, when we need you, we really want you around. When things are going bad, we really want you right here beside us. When we need you, we want to be able to pray to you. But you have forgotten, you have not hearkened to my voice. Well, the Israelites turned back to God when the going got tough. I don't know how long it's been since you read the book of Judges, but as you read the book of Judges, you see a cyclical thing going on here. And it's tragic, but it's so very real, and it speaks so very much to the lives of every one of us. And Israel did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. And then he'll talk about how God brought a nation in to dominate them, maybe to make slaves of them. And then Israel cried mightily to the Lord. And then he talks about raising up a judge or a prophet to help the people. God is so patient with us, folks. And yet so much of the time, we don't hearken to his voice. God delivered them. God protected them. It's so easy to forget about the goodness of God. It's so easy to forget about the blessings of God. And I heard someone say one time, well, I don't want to bother God. English translation of that, I don't want God to bother me. That's kind of the way that thing works, I believe. No, I don't go to church. I don't attend regularly. I go once in a while. I'm not active. I don't do it. I come to church, and that's about all I do. But I don't want to bother God. In other words, when I need you, God, I'll speak to you. I really love you, God, but I'm not going to speak to you except when things go bad, and I can ask you to do something for me. In a way, I think that's just a little bit on the tragic side, don't you? What is a focal point in my life? I asked this question in the Sunday morning Bible class. How many centers can a circle have? And then I mentioned, got to show off just a little bit here. I mentioned when I was in the 10th grade geometry class, we had to memorize different formulas. And what is the definition of a circle? Here it is, folks. A circle is a continually curved line, every point of which on that line is equidistant from a point called the center. That's it. Now, how many centers can a circle have? One. Only one. Your life and my life, we have a center somewhere. It may be pleasure, it may be family, it may be money, it may be position, it may be any one of a number of different things, but somewhere along the line there's a center, and the decisions that I make are filtered through that center. This is what God is getting at with Israel. He said, I brought you out of the land of Egypt. I delivered you. I took care of you. I gave you the land. And I said, I am the Lord your God. Don't mix with these idolatrous people. And you did not hearken to my voice. Why? Because God, you were just a handy thing to have around. Because God, I call on you when I need you. It wasn't, God, I am your servant. It was, God, you are my servant. It was not, God, I want to do all that I can for you. It was, God, I want you to do all you can for me. Now, why? Because we have the wrong center for our lives, the wrong center of the circle. Well, this points out something I think about the importance of devotion and fidelity. No, devotion and fidelity do not manifest themselves in exactly the same way with everybody. Because we are different kinds of people. We have different talents, different abilities, and so forth. But there are some cardinal ideas that are very, very important. One of these cardinal ideas is the fact that, let me just read you something here about some of the cardinal ideas of in the time of Gideon. Gideon was a leader. Gideon was one man. And so because the Midianites had dominated the children of Israel, they had to make for themselves dens in the mountains and the caves and in the strongholds. Had a terrible time. And so they deserted. They had to protect themselves. They had to go live in caves. They had to go live in strongholds. They had to get somewhere to protect themselves from these terrible, terrible Midianites. And then they cried to the Lord. When I'm in trouble, I come back to God. Well, what's the importance of devotion and fidelity? Have you ever read this passage in the Bible? It says, be thou faithful until death. Have you ever read that? Everybody say no, because that's not in the Bible. What does it say? It says, be faithful unto death. Not until, unto death. The interesting thing about that is that the word that's used there carries the idea in the face of, when you come in contact with. He says, be faithful, and by the way, this was written in the book of Revelation. Under persecution, these people were undergoing. He says, be faithful even in the face of death. Every ounce of our energy, everything that we are, everything that we have, needs to be focused on this center of our lives, Jesus Christ. When we fail to see that, we will fail in the Christian life. We will not be as devoted as we could be. I don't mean this in the absolute. But you know, the amount of time that we spend in Christian service says something about how important that service is. Let me draw not a deadly parallel, but a similarity here. Because I love my family, I spend time with them. Because I love my wife, I spent time with her. The reason I did that was because she meant most to me and more to me than anyone else in the world. The reason I spent time with my children was because my children mean more to me than any other human beings alive. Well, you see, when we really love God, we will spend time with God, time with God's family. We'd be willing to serve. Why? Because that's the way, or one way, that we express our devotion to Him. I think that it's interesting. I just wrote down a few important people who were complimented for their fidelity. Now, at least one of these is going to surprise us, I believe. Paul wrote to Philemon, and he said, I thank my God always, making mention of you in my prayers, hearing of your love and your faith, which you have toward all the saints. If someone wrote you a letter and said, one of the things I really like about you is how faithful you are, how devoted you are to Christ, would they say how many people you serve and what a reputation for faith that you have? Or would it be, I didn't know you were a Christian? How would it be? I'm trying to get us to think in terms not of corporate structure, but think in terms of personal structure. And to Timothy, Paul wrote, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, having been reminded of your unfeigned faith that was in you. It dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that it's in you also. Wouldn't that be a great thing? Someone writes a letter to you and says, I knew your mom and your grandmother, and they had such great faith. I remember them, and I see that faith in you. I see that determination in you. I see that devotion in you. I see that character of Christ in you that you seem to have inherited from your parents and your grandparents. Now here's the zinger. This is the surprise. Let me preface this just a little bit. The church at Corinth was the most corrupt church that we have any details of in the entire Bible. Now, the reason I put it that way is that the churches that are mentioned over in the second and third chapters of Revelation, the 7 churches of Asia, there were some corrupt churches there, but it doesn't give us any details much about them. The church at Laodicea says, you're lukewarm, I'll cough you up. Literally, I'll vomit you up. And all of these things. But the church at Corinth, we have 16 chapters in 1 Corinthians, and then we have the book of 2 Corinthians, and it tells us about the character of the church. Some denied the resurrection at the last day. Some were abusing the Lord's Supper. They didn't understand it. Some were even getting drunk at the Lord's Supper. They had divisions among them. There was a man there who was taking other Christians to law. And he goes on and on and on. Listen to what Paul says. To the Corinthian church, chapter 1, verse 4. I always thank God for you. I always thank God for you. Why in the world would you say that about a church like that, like Corinth? Folks, we've got to remember this. The church is not a club, it's a hospital. We're sick, all of us. We're sick with sin. We're seeking redemption through Christ. We're seeking to find a way to express our devotion and our concentration on the important things of Christ. And Paul says, with all your faults, with all your false teachings, I'm so thankful to God for you. I don't think Paul was trying to say, forget about these bad things. I just want you to know I'm thankful for you. No, he went ahead and wrote his most scathing letter to these people. Now, when we stop and think of this importance of being faithful. Importance of being faithful. What does it entail? Well, one of the things that come to mind here in this story of Gideon is very, very interesting. Let me pause for a moment and tell the story, and then we will come back to some texts here. We've already had the reading about how Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and that they turned back to the Lord and cried to the Lord. Let me tell you what happened. The Lord appeared to a man by the name of Gideon. And Gideon was a faithful man. And the Lord said, I've got a job for you, Gideon. And Gideon says, hold it right there, God. Well, didn't put it exactly that way, but that was the idea. Hold it right there, God. I'm from the tribe of Manasseh, and my family is the least in that tribe. And let me tell you something else, Lord. I'm the least equipped of anybody in my family. I can imagine God saying, I'm sorry, I think I've chosen the wrong guy here. But no, he didn't. He saw in Gideon, he saw a devotion that was very, very important. He saw the constancy of Gideon's life trying to be what God wanted him to be in every respect. And so, it's kind of like Moses. When God appeared to Moses at the burning bush and said, Moses, I want to send you back to Egypt. You're going to deliver my people out of bondage. Moses said, nothing doing. Nothing doing. I can't do that. I don't speak well, Moses said. God says, that's okay. You've got a brother. He's a good speaker. Moses said, they're not going to listen to me. He says, I'll take care of that. You tell them that I am sent you. And Moses finally gets real frustrated with God. And finally he says, get somebody else. Get somebody else. No, Moses, you're the man. You're the man. The power of one man sometimes is enormous. The power of one lady is sometimes enormous. It isn't how many people we have that's always the important thing. So, you know what Gideon did? Gideon was a God-worshiping man, and he felt all alone. And he said to the Lord, why have you allowed all these things to happen? Well, he goes on and finds out, Israel is very evil now. So Gideon now has his commission. Gideon is now told by God, you're my man, Gideon. Hey, wait just a minute. What if God told you, you're my man, you're my lady? I'm depending on you, because there ain't nobody else around to do your job. Well, that's kind of the way it was with Gideon. So you know what Gideon did? Gideon went, and there was an altar to Baal. Gideon tore that altar down. There was what's called an Asherah pole. An Asherah pole was just a pole that was put up as a monument to the goddess Asherah. He tore that pole down, chopped it up, took the wood and offered a sacrifice to God on another altar that he built. Oh, the people got angry about this and all this sort of thing. And then God says to Gideon, he says, you're going to deliver the people out of the hand of the Midianites. Oh, the first thing we need is a good army, isn't it? Yeah, get an army together. He got together 33,000 people. And God said, hold it right there. If you win the war with all these people, Israel's going to say, aha, we did it. He said, get rid of some of them. So Gideon, this is always, Gideon says, okay, anybody who's scared, go home. Anybody who's afraid, go home. Guess what? 22,000 out of the 23,000 got up and left. If that happened in a church, we'd say, oh, we said the wrong thing. Everybody left. Just a handful left here. 10,000 is all I've got left now, Lord. Still too many, Gideon. And so they went down, and the men who drank water from the river by put it up in the hands like that, and the people who bent over and lapped it up like a dog, says, choose the ones that picked it up in their hand. There was only 300 of them. And it was with these 300 that God accomplished his goal. Now, there's one other thing here. God accomplished his goal by doing something that was militarily not very good. But it worked. You know, sometimes I think I've got better ideas than God had. We've got to be contemporary. We've got to please the people that we're with. We've got to be what they want us to be and hear what they want to hear. Well, that's just not always God's way of doing things. God did not act the way people thought he ought to act about this. And what God was going to do was really kind of outlandish. But it won the battle. It won the battle. They were victorious. And nobody would ever have thought, by the way, earlier than this, that if you march around the city of Jericho the way I tell you to and do what I said, the walls are going to fall down. Oh, it'll never work. It'll never work. You see, sometimes God does things in such a way that you and I have to sit back and wonder, how did it ever succeed? Well, God's plan was to use a small group of people. Oh, wait just a minute. Hey, you know what? We're a small group of people. I wish this auditorium was full like it was a number of years ago. But we're just a small group of people. It's discouraging to be a small group of people and see all of these empty benches, isn't it? What can we do? I'll tell you a couple of things we can do. We can get to work. We can get to work. I don't mean just attending services. I mean get to work. Serve the congregation. Serve the community. God made us his servants. He's not our servants. We are his servants. And when the people in Gideon's little army there, the 300, when they served as God wanted them to serve, God prospered them. One of the things that we've got to do, folks, is we've got to evangelize. Do you realize that basically the congregation has not had any evangelistic plans for a long time? But that's the primary goal of the congregation, is evangelism, bringing people to the Lord. Oh, we've been good on maintenance, and I'm not talking about the building, I'm talking about us. We've been okay on maintenance and some things like that. You know what I wish people would do this morning? Maybe I ought not say this. Probably not very many people will do this. That's the negative side of it. Why don't you do this, though? Say, I want to serve. I don't know how I can serve. I don't know what I can do, but I do want to serve in some way. Take a card out from the front of the pew there, write your name and phone number on it, and we will think that indicates you would be glad to serve in some way. Men, women, children, whatever. You'll be glad to serve in some way. And just lay it there on the pew. And we'll pick it up. Some of us will give you a call and say, here are things that you could do. What would you like to do? What we need is leadership and service in the congregation. That was the thing. Don't you see Gideon say, Lord, I can't do it. Moses, I can't do it. But they turned out to be two of the great leaders in the Old Testament. But that was their first response. Are you saying, no, I can't do it? No, I don't have time? No, I'm too busy with something else? Or are you going to be like Gideon and say, I'll serve. I don't know what I can do. I don't know how to do it, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to learn. 2 or 3 things that we need. Dependable people. People who come on time. People who stay. People who serve. People who work. And they can be depended on. We need willing people. People who are willing to sacrifice some time, willing to give their energy, willing to lead in whatever way they might be able to lead. And then we need people who say, I don't know what in the world I can do, but I'll try. People who will try. Because you see, when we find people who will try, there's all kind of training and things like that that we can bring to them. People who want to learn. That's the reason we have evening services. That's the reason we have classes, is because some people are eager to learn. And that's where you learn the Bible. That's where you learn service, is in classes and such as that. Well, what am I? What are you? What is it all about, church? It's about service. It's about devotion. It's about being willing to sacrifice for the good of the cause of Christ. It's about evangelizing. That's the reason we need people to fill in these empty spaces so that we can become what God wants us to be. Gideon was a great servant. If you are not a servant of God today, maybe you're not a Christian. Maybe you would like to become a Christian and embark on this great life of service to God. Service to your fellow man. It's a wonderful time to become a Christian. With faith in your heart, turning away from sin in your life in repentance, be baptized into Christ, be a child of God. We're going to sing an invitation song, and we invite you to come. Let's stand together and sing.